our COBT listeners and viewers, it's Maynard, Mike, and Mark with something we're super excited about, which is we're going to get to talk to Steven Kobos today. He's the president and CEO of Excelerate Energy. Excelerate is a global company. They have a fleet of 12 FSRU vessels around the world. They do business in multiple jurisdictions. As you'll hear, the company is more than ships. It's an integrated platform where they can provide gas, power, gas delivery. It's fascinating. And they're also just doing some business in key places around the world, everywhere from the Mideast to Southeast Asia to the Caribbean. We're going to get a fascinating tour of the world. And given what's happening in the world right now, we couldn't think of a better guest. So, Steven, let me just pause and say thank you so much for joining us. We're super, super pumped to get to visit with you today.
Maynard, it's my honor. Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, Mike, there's never a dull moment. What would you tell us about what's going on in the markets?
Yeah, Maynard, it seems like every week we talk about Iran being on or off, right? Last week we were on, right? We're going to have a deal come. Markets went to all-time highs. Crude oil prices fell down. And this week it's, well, we're no closer to a deal than we were, 3 months ago. And so crude oil is up around $6 a barrel to $94 a barrel. Markets are down a little bit. Energy's up 2.5% today on that after being down about 5% over the last week. And so that's kind of where the markets are. I'd say from a bond standpoint, right? Bond markets over the last couple of weeks have been worried about just what's the inflation going to look like in the second half of this year. Bonds today up around 6 or 7 basis points of yields on the 10-year bond. We're up around 4.5%, what was really interesting. Everyone's caught up in this inflation issue, but U.S. manufacturing report for May came out today. It's the best report we've seen in 4 years. And so the U.S. economy, the U.S. manufacturing base is expanding. And so that, obviously got inflation going up a little bit because if manufacturing's really kicking in and you have all this inflation, that's probably that's a dangerous signal for bond markets. But I just wanted to highlight the U.S. is growing. It's growing its fastest rate in 4 years. So something to be really proud of. I'd say from a WTI standpoint, obviously we talked about oil prices being up, but the thing we are hearing in the last week or two is you're hearing executives from Exxon, Chevron are warning about, inventories globally are dangerously low. We're entering the summer months here where demand picks up. You still have 9 million barrels a day off the markets. Every day that goes by, every week that goes by that we do not open that straight, you're going to see physical markets start to, move higher. We've come down quite a bit here in the last couple of weeks. It doesn't seem like we're any closer. We need to have a deal. If we don't have a deal here in the next 3, 4, 5 weeks, you're going to see oil prices are going to go up because physical markets are getting to the bottom of the barrel on some of these inventories. So something we're watching really closely. Last thing I'd say is really is we're watching IPOs, right? In the next 2 weeks, we're going to have an interesting set of IPOs. Obviously, everyone's watching a SpaceX IPO that's coming next week. It's roughly they're raising $75 billion for a $1.75 trillion, $2 trillion valuation. Market's completely focused on that. The one that we're focused on is Inea Holdings. This is basically a power generation type company, who's it's coming Thursday of this week. It's coming at they're looking to raise $2 billion on a $20 billion valuation. So this is not a small little company. And so the reason we're looking at this company is just to see the enthusiasm for distributed generation companies. We're watching Liberty Energy. We're watching Solaris Energy. And we're also watching Cat and Cummins to see how these stocks basically react into and out of this deal. So those are where markets continue to really be really strong. And so we just wanted to highlight that. I think it's going to be an interesting week.
Okay, good stuff. Mark, you watch upstream all around the planet. This is a good day for you to talk about natural gas and global demand. Anything you'd add going in?
Yeah, look, I think just, the history of Excelerate Energy, over the past 20 plus years, the LNG market's totally changed. Countries that were importers have become exporters and things like that. And these guys are just really placed well. I really like their vision around providing energy security, and I'm looking forward to talking more with Steven about that and their business plans going forward.
Awesome. Well, Steven, thanks again for joining us. We do feel super lucky to have you, and we've known you for a while. We're lucky to have a mutual friend in Deborah Byers, and so we knew of the company. Got to spend a little time with you, and then boy, you really hit our radar in the last few weeks because we kept hearing you were visiting customers, particularly customers in the Mideast, and so what a timely. We're very lucky to get to visit with you right now. I can imagine it's a hectic time to try to keep up with everything that's happening in your business.
It's dynamic. I think that's a good word for it, Maynard. I do want to recognize Deborah. Obviously, Deborah's on our board of directors, and tell you, was over with her in Korea. We won't burden your audience with techno jargon like FSRU, so floating storage regasification unit or floating LNG import terminal. But Deborah was the godmother breaking the champagne bottle on the biggest, baddest one of those in the world, the Accelerate Acadia that we just launched in March. So I'll tell you, if you were there, the Korean guy at Hyundai was counting to 3 and Deborah broke the bottle on 2. She was so fired up. So.
Well, we saw the video. She also kind of threw it like a fastball. I mean, it was really, she let it rip.
That was not going to bounce before home plate. That was in there solidly. But all joking aside, that's an amazing asset that I finally got our engineers and Hyundai's engineers to admit that its throughput capacity is 1.2 BCF a day. I mean, that's how much LNG it can vaporize every day and push into a market. Our floating terminals in general, I suppose, have about 55 million tons of annual throughput through them. So you start thinking about, 428 million tons of LNG last year, and our fleet of downstream infrastructure is 55 million tons. So it shows the heft of it and what's possible, when people really need it. But you brought up Middle East, Maynard. We are, and Mark was bringing up our history, but he's exactly right. This company was founded in 2003 by George Kaiser, Tulsa oil man, banker, investor, and he's stuck with it all that time. We IPO'd in 2022. Kaiser didn't take any money off the table. We plowed it all back in. We knew that we were at a special point in the cycle and that we would be accessing the markets to grow this business and scale it. Mark does talk, though, about we've been here since these assets existed originally, Maynard, to help out with this incredible deficit of nat gas that the United States had. So just like Cheniere, Freeport, Golden Pass, we were going to be part of the answer to get nat gas to the United States. And that all changed with shale. Shale eliminated U.S. Demand and made U.S. supply inevitable. And for us as a company, it caused us even back then to say, hey, we need to go open some new markets. We need to find new homes for LNG. And the first one we did was Kuwait with KPC and KNPC. I spent about 3 months over there building out their Mina Al-Amadi import terminal at their refinery there for KNPC. And, the Kuwaitis were smart. They knew at the time that if they imported affordable LNG and exported fuel oil, they'd make about $20 million a cargo. So that also made us realize that there's a coal to Newcastle element of the story sometimes, and you just never know who needs this wonderful thing called LNG. So started off with that. I will say it was a great experience. You talked about going to the Gulf. I think I did the math. I think I've been to the Arabian Gulf 75 times since my first trip to Kuwait in the past 19 years. So it does feel kind of like a second home, but we are all over the world. So Argentina, Brazil, Finland, Germany, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Pakistan, Bangladesh, et al. So anyway, I will say one thing about Kuwait. I knew I was in good hands because Farouk Al-Zonki was the CEO of KNPC at the time. And he had 2 degrees from the University of Oklahoma. And I thought, well, hell, I've got 2 degrees from OU. I mean, we'll get along just great.
Yeah, luckily he wasn't an Oklahoma State guy. Steven, can I ask you, so, as viewers think about your business, any place, particularly that needs it quickly, any place that wants extra natural gas quick can use your service, so to speak. How quickly can you get a vessel in place, or how often do your vessels move around, or do they tend to just go to a certain place and they're so economic they end up staying there for a long time?
In general, Maynard, once people get access to LNG, it's almost like Moore's Law. They just want more LNG. It's such a useful addition to any market's energy mix that it's very seldom that they're going to depart for good once they go there. Now, that being said, people don't understand how much LNG they're going to want. So they might start off with smaller ambitions and then want more. The beauty of floating assets, there are a number of advantages, but it certainly gives more flexibility to enhance or increase the scale of the throughput. I think about some continental countries that Europe, you think about Poland, they built that terminal on the German border and then they wanted more. Then you just got to go out and you got to start building more enormous onshore tanks. If it were a floating asset, you would just float in a bigger one. So that's an advantage. In many parts of the world, don't have the advantages of Texas and Louisiana and some of the Chinese river basins in terms of the just magnitude of skilled labor and the capital that can be deployed. So if you're going to build a really hefty onshore regas facility, you're not going to mobilize talent to some mangrove swamp. You're going to do it a few kilometers offshore and then flow it through a subsea pipeline and have a nice day. And that allows you to do quality control, in yards that you can have fantastic quality control and not have the vagaries of EPC contracting in unusual locations. Argentina, we're 40 kilometers up the Paraná River. That's not someplace you would have built something onshore to scale.
And maybe just so all of us understand, how easy is it to build the infrastructure that's going to take the gas onshore? Is that complicated or relatively straightforward to hook up?
I'd like to act like it's complicated, Maynard. There are barriers to entry. I think we have lots of advantages. We have teams placed all over the world. We have large offices in Singapore, Dubai, South America, bird dogging these things. But if you press me, I would admit that a floating terminal, a regas terminal, is basically a 900-foot long plus tea kettle. And you apply a little bit of warmth to a liquid and it turns into a vapor. So it's not that, I don't want to denigrate it, but you're basically just connecting to a ship's manifold, this enormous tea kettle, and you're getting it into their main pipe. So it can be done.
But this is I was thinking of it, this is the good news, is if I'm Bangladesh or Vietnam or Germany, pick a place, and I realize I need some more in a certain place, to hook up to one of these ships is pretty easy. It's not a big deal.
Oh, in oil and gas, fairly large things we say it's no big deal, right? Yeah, look, we've got a great track record of sovereigns all over the world relying on us. We operate our own assets. We obsess about those assets. We have 99.9% uptime on them. And because we know in some of those markets you mentioned, if you don't have throughput, then the lights can go off in the capital. So we do feel like each year we get more and more of a moat because people are unwilling to take a flyer on a newbie when something as essential as keeping the air conditioning and the lights on and the capital is at stake.
Well, and I noticed on your webpage, I think one of the slogans is from Boston to Bangladesh.
Yeah.
You getting gas for our friends in Boston. This is not all exotic delivery points. Sometimes it happens right here.
We'll get LNG to people who need it, Maynard, but we're not opposed to them getting it by a pipe too.
Right.
Just in case my friends at NEDC are listening, so be clear on that.
So we mentioned the latest ship, the Acadia, that you built, and I know you were downplaying the technology, but can you talk about the latest addition to the fleet and how it compares to some of your earliest ships?
Well, we've been learning all along, and we've been upgrading. I tell our people, look, the U.S. Air Force plans on flying B-52s until the 2050s. We're going to keep upgrading these assets and extend their useful life as long as we need to. So we do keep making upgrades to the existing fleet. We just added for Petrobras in Brazil a reliquefaction unit to further reduce their boil off, and we can talk about Brazil later. Brazil's fascinating. It is 80% hydroelectric power, 10% solar wind, but they face a drought every 5 years or so. And at that point, the economy still has to hum along. So they've got a bunch of floating terminals, but they just don't use them very much from time to time. And that's on purpose. But as a consequence, we focused with them of just minimizing boil off, trying to ensure that insurance against drought is as affordable as possible. What I would say about Acadia is, one, she's a beast. Peaking, she could push 1.2 BCF a day into a market. She's got fantastic boil off. So we're very excited. She is going on an intermediate basis to Jordan at Aqaba, but eventually she will go to Iraq, and I know we'll have a discussion about the war conflict, but the fact her ability to send out a lot will be important there, and we are bullish about that project. We remain bullish, but it's got all the whistles and bells. So Deborah got a good one.
Well, maybe while we're on the Mideast, you used that great expression about coal to Newcastle. I think understanding how some of your Mideast clients are utilizing this service is very interesting, because you think of it as a place that has tons of gas. So what exactly are they doing? I think that would be great for people to understand.
Yeah. Well, we talked about opening up Kuwait, and Kuwait even builds far more capacity. And I think a lot of folks, when we're talking about LNG, they forget that Kuwait's nearly 20 years into this, and they're still importing 6 million tons a year. And frankly, there have been cargoes going into Kuwait since the conflict started, if people pay attention to those sorts of things. It continues to be a spark spread type play there, the value of the fuel oil, the value of the LNG, and it makes sense for them. And we do think that while many locations in the Gulf, it's about energy security, it's about a backup, it's about redundancy for mature energy systems, but it gets used from time to time to refill storage, all sorts of things. Do believe that Iraq is compelling eventually next year, because there's just a severe deficit, and they've got, everybody's always wondering where the gas turbines are. Well, they've got a heck of a lot of them installed that are starved for gas. So it's one of those, any place that has installed gas-fired capacity but it's not getting gas to them is a place that we love, and we want to help them deal with their severe electricity deficits that come with that. But it is, as I said, KPC, they had the wit. I think I'd like to say that we called the Kuwaitis in 07, 08. I think they called us because they were smart enough to know what they could do with that. It's no secret. They're getting like I think 3 million tons from Shell every year, mostly Rosslafan, I assume. I think there are another 3 million tons from QE. So, and one thing I do know is I think there will be intense competition to help us with the supply for Iraq from intra-basin. If you think of the Arabian Gulf as being a basin, like an intra-basin delivery will be, I expect for anyone who has Rosslafan volumes to fall over themselves to supply us there on what will be an integrated project.
Iraq, is that a situation where over some extended period they will figure out a way to get their own domestic gas production? Like how should we think about that, how Iraq develops?
You know, our deal is 5 years, Maynard, because you know, sometimes people don't want to think what the future will bring. My own guess is it will be far more like Kuwait and go for a long time. And when after they're done dealing with severe shortage and deficit, which has meant no reliable power in Baghdad for 22 years, that then they will at some point move to a displacement of liquid, which is very high in their energy mix just because of the sense it makes in money. And of course, as their E&P activities go up too, they're going to have further power demands as well. So I think it's there for a long time, but we always like to give people what they think they need at any one time. And 60 months of that will be a good delivery. And for us, we're trying to move more and more, Maynard, to an integrated molecule plus our infra, because we think that downstream LNG and regas inevitably is going to make the same journey that liquefaction did, where it went from at least in the US, a full capacity model where you bring your own molecule and then you take it and it comes out the other side a different format. We think inevitably downstream, just for simplicity, will follow that same model that became dominant in liquefaction in the US. And we are trying to get there, before others. And also, we've built a company with the right sort of balance sheet, the right sort of leverage that allows us to have sensible discussions about LNG supply that we can bundle with our infrastructure and deliver it. And we've done that in Bangladesh. We're going to do that in Iraq. Our platform in Jamaica does that. So that's where we think the future is going.
And just so maybe everybody follows it, in the case of Kuwait and Iraq, it's very interesting. The decision they're making is we could burn fuel oil for power, or we could import LNG, make the power that way, and export the fuel oil. And it's that second choice that helps them make money. Is that it's simplistic, but is that really what's happening?
Yeah, I think certainly that's true in Kuwait, and we're no longer there. But in Iraq, it's a massive deficit, Maynard. And we've been talking to them for a long time through our Dubai office. And I said, hey, once you build that 40-kilometer pipe from the location to your main line, we'll take you seriously. And then last summer, our Dubai guys called and said, hey, they built the pipeline. I was like, well, this just went to top of the stack for us. If somebody cares enough to build that 40-mile pipe connection before we even have a deal, then I know they're serious. And that's when we went hard with them.
Yeah, Steve, I kind of feel like the Russian-Ukraine war kind of put, Excelerate on the top of people's lists of, companies that are very unique, provide a lot of flexibility to take advantage of that situation. Now we obviously have the Mideast. And so I just want to get a sense for, and we haven't talked about it yet, is what is the size of the market right now you're going at, and how much is the market going to grow over the next 4 or 5 years in a million tons per annum type basis?
Mike, I think you're saying in a gentle way, that was kind of an odd choice, guys, to IPO like a month after Russia invaded. And so we were happy to reopen the U.S. equity markets back in 2022. Russia-Ukraine was, if I think through what the LNG big moments are that we've all faced over the past 25 years, first was shale, maybe some of the liberalization in Europe. We had the Qatari moratorium, I think we've all forgotten about, that was there in place. Then we ran into the commodity super cycle in Asia and Fukushima, and then that sparked all those FIDs in Australia and the first round in US. And then you've got Russia, Ukraine sparking further FIDs. So what we have seen, and back in 2022 when we IPO'd, people were saying, well, don't you want a piece of equity liquefaction? Don't you need that if you're going to integrate? And we're going around talking to our investors saying, no, I don't think you get it. The Russian invasion is going to spark all these FIDs. It's going to spark a ton of LNG. We don't need to sit around and worry about EPC risk on liquefaction. I assure you there's going to be plenty of LNG and it's going to be affordable. And that's what we're actually seeing happen. And if you think about it too, Mike, as we think back on where we've seen the LNG world, I remember my first LNG conference in Houston in 2003, and people were saying, do you think a spot market in LNG is ever going to develop? It's kind of laughable now. But if you look back the past few years, what you don't see is that what you saw in the 80s and the 90s, those end users taking all of it. If we think about even 2006, it was like 160 million tons. It's mostly all end users. Now, if you look at these FIDs that are being taken, I'd say 80% are portfolio players of one stripe or another. 20% are end users, and sometimes they have their own trading house too, and that's a way to ensure physical energy security when they need it. But we saw that coming, and that's a company like Accelerate that has opened markets, like opened Pakistan, opened Bangladesh. These are just those two countries alone. We regasify over 10% of Ras Laffan in any normal year. So that the scale of what you can do in opening these markets is tremendous. And what we believe is we keep doing this, we keep integrating it. Eventually, there's just too much TAM there. We will go capture this. We could easily, I used to tell our guys, we want to be integrating 5 million tons by 2030, but we're going to hit that kind of already next year. So I could see us integrating 10 million tons a year by 2030 with our infrastructure. But at that point, somebody's going to look around and say, who the hell do they think they are? Somebody's going to have an XTO shale moment and say, we need to bolt those boys on, I think. But the TAM's, you never want to tell an investor TAM's unlimited. It's pretty darn unlimited. So it's really going to be a question of picking the right projects instead of trying to, take all of them, I would say.
Yeah, Steven, I guess one of the things I'd like to chat with you about, we've been paying a lot of attention to Argentina. The Vaca Muerta has been, this amazing kind of what's happened in the U.S. is happening there. Obviously, you're there in Argentina. Curious to get your thoughts on that play and its impact in that region.
Oh, man. I was in the YPF headquarters the day that Christina announced Vaca Muerta. And I think it was 2014. I can't remember. Somebody will have to go back and look and see when that press conference was. And, there are a couple of ways of looking at it, because I do think they are going to be producing LNG, and I think there will be a need for it. And I suspect some of that LNG is going to make its way 40 kilometers up the Paraná River, where we have an import terminal. But they use, first, the obvious implication is, do you think you guys are there for a long time? I think we are. They got on a 2-year evergreen, and kind of hate that because they've got a really good rate I can't do anything about. But where Buenos Aires is positioned on that system, and given Bolivia's continuing lack of reliability, I'll call it, I think they're going to need that FSRU there in winter just because it's a great place to inject into Buenos Aires. So they also use it, they'll use it a couple of days every summer. I think they're using it for kind of synthetic compression on their system because you generate, a lot of pressure when you are regasifying off those things. So I think we're there. We could easily be there 10 years. Don't hold me to it, but I think we can. And I think we'll be a useful part of their system. But I think it's inevitable that we will start loading some Argentinian LNG into it as just part of how they manage their system. So there's that. And then I guess you make the case for, will people want further geographic diversification of LNG? Yeah, probably. So it probably is a good tailwind for the development of that project.
Steven, do you mind talking about, you referenced it before, how you're growing your economic value add by integration, and what exactly that means that the company over time will look like? I know power, a lot of the people contracting for LNG, their ultimate goal is power, but maybe if you could just explain where you think you're headed with that strategy, that'd be really interesting.
Maynard, it's kind of horses for courses. Every market's going to be different in terms of what their needs are. Now, a new market, a wholly new market, and we have some of our first priority markets were gas economies that were suffering massive decline curves in their domestic nat gas production. For example, we've been in Bangladesh since 2008. We provide 1.1 BCF out of their system's 3.1 BCF of nat gas capacity. And in the 8 years we've been doing that, their domestic production has fallen a little over a BCF a day. So we've done all this and they've kind of been running in place, but at the same time, gas-based economy, so decent pipelines, power plants, all that stuff. So that's good. Pakistan faced a bit of the same situation with a just cliff-like fall in domestic production, but they did have the system for it. But some markets you're going to go to have not had gas, just need gas. And for those markets, I would say it's like a strip mall up here in the Woodlands. You need an anchor tenant who's going to create that pull-through demand, create traffic for you. And those are the sorts of places where I think you would go further downstream to establish that pull-through demand for nat gas yourself. It reminds me a little bit, we were in Israel for 10 years off of Hadera. If you go back and look at it, I think what the Israelis were really doing was building up a nat gas economy while they were bringing Tamar and Leviathan online, because you can't just turn that valve suddenly if you haven't built up the nat gas offtake. So in a way, that was kind of like a kindling, getting something started or priming the pump, so to speak. So we'll go as far downstream as we need to generate that pull-through demand if we believe in the market itself, because that's first for us. Is this a market that we think will drive, has great fundamentals? And that's why we've been paid every penny since 2008.
And do you mind if I'm a customer like a Bangladesh or one of these countries, and I'm thinking about, there's obvious speed advantage to your service and doing it floating, but if that aside, how do the costs compare if I were to build an onshore higher volume facility compared to, or however you would characterize that comparison?
I have to be careful because I'm going to Bangladesh later in the month. And
we'll use maybe a different example.
No, but I know they have some aspirations, but I know perfectly well if they do build anything onshore, it will take time. So we're just saying, hey, we'll bridge for you. But I get back to my point. It is difficult in many markets to mobilize the type of manpower you need for the scale. You're all familiar with the converted import terminals at Cheniere, at Freeport, at Golden Pass. you can imagine building those in some place which lacks the infrastructure to support that scale. So we're an easy, affordable, and ultimately it's all about affordability. So I'm confident that we provide greater affordability.
Is there a way, not to badger you, but I'm just curious, is there a way to think about, if I'm in one of these locations, I've got the cost of my LNG, I got to buy the LNG. Is there some quick math I can do for, okay, it's the LNG price plus blank tends to get me gas on shore? Is that a way to think about your service?
Yeah, I think it's evolved over time. Pre-Russia, Ukraine, man, every energy minister, it's like you want to be the smallest Swiss trading house in the world and optimize everything. And then that works great until Europe takes all your LNG, and then suddenly you're burning furnace oil and furniture and, anything you can for energy. And you're like, what just happened? So the reaction to Russia, Ukraine was you would see most of these markets around the world moving far higher percentage of long-term priced LNG. And the reality is that's affordable. It is very affordable for them. What they can't have are supply shocks where they have to compete with Western Europe, who's going to grab every molecule, or they can't worry about what happens when China has a polar vortex and doesn't send their LNG to Europe like they did sitting at Europe in 22. So we've seen that. I think the question post the current conflict is, are they going to push for more geographic diversification, or are they going to find security in a more favorable price point, which was always the case in the past with affordable Brent, but which came with destination restrictions. So we'll see how they react to it. I think we're seeing more interest in US LNG, certainly, than we were before Hormuz.
Are you feeling, I think we've been bumping into a sense that the U.S. administration was being helpful marketing U.S. LNG or otherwise promoting large U.S. company activity. Is that something that shows up in your business?
Absolutely. And it is, thank you for prodding me because I know you've had both Secretary Burgum and Secretary Wright on this program, and I can't tell you how much they are pushing for U.S. LNG around the world. And we're there as a U.S. reliable party who opens up those markets and does make that possible. But you see them all over the world, Maynard. I mean, and just keeping up a pace that is hard to imagine. That's coming from me, who's always throwing a pity party about travel, and yet those guys are doing more about it. So we are incredibly grateful, and everyone in the industry should be, for Secretary Burgum, Secretary Wright, NEDC. I mean, the fact that we all know Jared and Brittany's names, his staffers who make a lot of it happen, they're just tireless supporting U.S. interests. And I would add Ben Black at DFC. DFC is becoming a formidable tool out there to enhance U.S. interests around the world. So I couldn't be happier. Now, in the past, I would always stop in U.S. embassies around the world, mainly because I wanted a good cup of coffee. And some places I couldn't find it other than at embassy. And you would run into these folks from Commerce and State, and they would always try to help you. They would always be advocating. But I think what was missing was the sporadic support from Washington. And so you get those career professionals who always want to help American businesses, but you get the message coming from inside the Beltway of you are going to help U.S. companies, and it's fantastic.
For a while in the LNG trade, and I will clumsily ask this question, but there was this sense of, well, I care about where the cargo came, and I care about who produced the gas, and tell me how low impact the gas is, and then I'll tell you if I want the cargo. Like, this was a trend in the LNG business. Is that what's the state of that trend? Is there are people still particular about where the cargo came from, who produced it, et cetera? Like what is that sensitivity like now?
I mean, go ask. I love our European friends, but go ask them. I guess they'll start carrying in 27, right, on provenance of LNG, perhaps more than they do right now. We're about getting energy access to countries who desperately need it. And as you know, sometimes I hear about some of these cargoes that have changed ownership 27 times while they're crossing an ocean. It is hard to keep track of that. Our model is pretty boring. We want to buy and sell in the same index that one of these customers requires. We're not looking to kill it. We're not going to be the world's smallest trading house. We just want a predictable uplift to infrastructure. So we're pretty boring. We're buying Henry, selling Henry into Jamaica. We have one contract, we're buying TTF, selling TTF. Iraq will be buy JKM, sell JKM, and then we have a buy Brent, sell Brent. So I don't know how many shows you've done, Maynard, but I think we're now the most boring person who touches a molecule that you've had, if that helps answer the question. But as you know, even U.S. off-takers, how many of those Chinese volumes are actually going to China, for example? People that have long-term U.S. offtake are typically optimizing it, delivering into Europe, and then procuring in a JKM market when they can. So I think the beautiful thing about US LNG is if you need those physical volumes that you have contracted, you've got them. That's the great thing. Now, do people play around with them? Not us, but others up until a crisis, probably. But I think that certainty of supply from the US is a pretty powerful thing that motivates a lot of that offtake. And again, it may not be what they do every time, but they know they can, and that matters.
Yeah, Steven, if I think about the last 10 years or so, one of the trends that's been out there is just global exploration spending dollars have gone down quite significantly. A lot of people would say we're just not spending enough to grow, gas oil volumes, over the next 5-10 years. We'll see. I think the question I would ask is, it feels like some of these oil major companies are looking to start stepping back into exploration, or talking to large cap E&Ps, maybe doing that as well. Maybe thinking about that, if we now start to spend from a global if we start to spend more going forward, how does that maybe affect your business? Especially if you say like Vietnam and some of these countries start finding discoveries, they're able to do their own, gas or oil. Do you see that affecting your business in any form or fashion here? Or is there just so much growth that it doesn't matter?
I think Maynard's been to India Energy Week before. I remember listening to you over from India at some point a few years ago, Maynard, but I was there, and one of the thoughts that struck me was Dr. Sultan of UAE was on saying, hey, there's a demand not just from AI, but for AC. And they proceeded to lay out just what the air conditioning demands of electricity are over the next 10 years, which were kind of eye-popping. I think there is sufficient demand, and perversely, Mike, I would say that we welcome it because we want it to be affordable. We want LNG to be affordable. I suppose sometimes annoy my friends here in Houston because, yeah, I love affordable LNG, man. We should take all the FIDs we possibly can because you want that to compete. You want to open markets. You want to ensure that you will be defeating coal around the world. So all of that is in your long-term interest. I think that deploying capital to E&P will foster that further. And I would say there's only one market that has destroyed demand for LNG, and that's the United States. So I don't look for the phenomenon of the United States to just pop up all over the world. I think we are kind of a thing unto itself. And if there's a little bit of it and it comes as a consequence of more affordable LNG all around the world, we're all for it.
And maybe the second question I have is really an industry-wide question. When I start to look at, LNG projects, these guys are looking for 15, 20, 25-year type contracts. You guys are more into, 5, 6, 7 years, right? Maybe talk about that, if your contracts can extend, and if maybe, the guys that you're contracted with, how often do they renew, or what does that look like, and, stuff of that nature.
Well, yeah, since the IPO, we have recontracted coming up on 5 of our existing contracts at significant uplift. So there has been and remains quite a tension in the asset supply demand case. So that's why I was saying, man, I wish that Argentine ship weren't on an evergreen, because they're killing it. And I'd like to get my hands on it, at the same time, happy to take care of them. So I do think the fundamentals are good for the long haul. At the same time, like if we're talking about the nature of that offtake, these portfolio guys are going to be willing to supply you with 5 or 10 years, regardless of whether the liquefaction companies' banks demanded that they get 20 offtake from the portfolio players. So I actually think it's setting up kind of perfectly for us to sit in that middle, ecosystem. That's certainly what we're building toward.
Yeah, it does sound like the flexibility you have is a huge advantage over the next 5 or 6, 7 years, especially, Arjun talks a lot about super volatility, and I think, that's the right thing, and having flexibility seems to be the right way to go.
I'll tell you, 2 conflicts in the past 4 years, people care about energy security. So, strangely, our phone's ringing off the wall more than it was. There always has been robust demand, but when it just reminds everybody sitting at their energy minister desk in some country that they need to be obsessed about it. And in terms of energy security, our Finland project's a great example. Like, people forgot, because it got buried in a news cycle, but when that Baltic Connector pipeline from Estonia to Finland was cut, we were Finland's only nat gas from October 23 to May of 24. And the Finnish government told me that they ran a study, and just during one kind of polar vortex type event, they calculated the economy would have suffered a 2.5 billion euro loss if they hadn't have had the access to the LNG. So we were talking earlier, what's the price calculation? I don't know. What's the cost of avoiding a 2.5 billion euro hit? And that's the world we're living in.
Yeah, speaking of our colleague Arjun Murthy, Stephen, I'm sure you've heard him talk about the lucky billion, and then there's everyone else. And I think that fits really well into your business model as you take energy to, potentially the emerging economies around the world. I'd just love to get your view on what do you think that looks like over the next 10 years? For example, is Africa, the continent, are they ever, one of their countries ever a customer of yours?
It's a sore spot. It's a sore spot with me, Mark, that we don't have an Africa project now. I've been looking at a lot over the years. It's all going to be about the right place and the right time, and the right market, and what are those fundamentals associated with it. I'm sure we'll be in Africa in the next 10 years. I have no doubt about that. But the beautiful thing, and I think why all our employees get excited about Excelerate, is they know when they go to these places, they can see literally the lights come on. Like, you show up, I remember the first time we showed up off of Chittagong, and then suddenly the lights literally came on. The urea plant is back in operation. The steel mill is employing people. And to just have that immediacy, it really means something. And we sit here in Houston, either I'm busy or I'm an idiot, but I don't have a generator, like everyone else, even after all these tropical storms and hurricanes. And part of that, I told our people, okay, every 4 years I have to throw out everything and go to HEB and spend more money than I should. And that's probably the sunk cost of the generator. But I want to be reminded of what life is like in so many, just in the tiniest way of so many of our markets. And can you imagine you have to go buy food every day because you don't have reliable refrigeration? You know, it's just eye-opening. So I think our young people really enjoy the mission and what we do. And I'm grateful because that pushes a lot of talent our way.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Steven, we mentioned up front, we've been lucky to get to know you and certainly knew about the company, but then the Hormuz and the fact that you were in the region visiting customers, really jumped out at us. Do you mind, as we wrap up, just talking a little bit about where we are right now with Hormuz? I know this is a difficult problem and it's hard to have an opinion on it, but you're watching it, I assume, just constantly, and you're getting feedback from customers and people in the region. And so it would just be, it would be a shame on me if I didn't ask you for some color on all that.
Maynard, and I'm not going to talk out of school, obviously, on anything I hear from the folks in the region. I did go over first because I wanted to visit our assets. I want to see the men and women who we were asking to serve in that environment and hang out on the assets for 4 or 5 hours and just show that, yes, the CEO does believe that this is appropriate and we can do this in a good way. So the first thing was to go visit our own employees that are in the region, and we have quite a few. The second point, though, is just to visit friends. As I said, I've been going over there for 19 years, first Kuwait, then Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and now starting to Iraq, and just checking on them. Now, it's a little surreal, I think, because things were looking normal, but they're not normal yet, so that's disquieting. I don't think any of us would enjoy seeing intercepts over our house of any time. So it is unsettling for them. And I just want to go over and show, moral support and that we care and we haven't forgotten about our friends. In terms of where this goes as a company, I think it's inevitable that it reopens. I mean, all wars have one thing in common. Eventually they end. And the speed at which they end has something to do with the incentives that are out there for the folks involved. Now that there is a naval blockade, now that there is no oil flowing, it strikes me that there's just too much economic alignment of interest out there for folks. So I'm confident that there will be some species of modus vivendi that emerges. The level of formality, TBD, but the reality is it will reopen because everyone has aligned economic interests in that happening. Now, I would like for that to be sooner. I would like that to be sooner for the sake of our friends over there. But our whole discussion today in terms of where LNG is going, it will come back on. It's just a matter of you pick a month, you pick the outcome. But Hormuz is going to open. We will see normalized flows. Ras Laffan will be back online. My personal guess is that North Field expansion is further along than people think, and that we won't even see much of a hiccup. And at the same time, we'll have U.S. volumes coming online. So I don't look for any type of long-term shock to the system. And in fact, our desire for it to happen sooner rather than later is simply humanitarian and our regard for our friends rather than what it means for the future of the opportunity set.
Well, Steven, this has been fantastic. We usually, Mike and I have been looking at each other a couple of times because we always listen for what's the tagline on the show. And I think you had 5 or 6 as we went through there. But your optimism around all this is helpful and encouraging, and also just as we started by saying, your window into what is going on in the world is really an amazing company and platform. So we're so glad we got to visit with you.
Well, Appreciate that, Maynard, and I appreciate your flexibility on recording this because I'm going to hop a plane, and tomorrow the USS Nimitz is making a goodwill and humanitarian call in Kingston, where we supply a lot of the power. So I'm going to go down and visit them tomorrow and see my friends in Jamaica. So thank you for your flexibility.
Well, we're glad to have you. And when you told us that, I resisted the urge to say, oh my gosh, could we get you from the deck of the USS Nimitz? I was like, I don't want to scare Steven. I can't ask this.
I'd like to reserve favors from the Navy for something bigger.
There's another one. Fantastic. Anyway. Steven, thank you so much for your time.
This has been a real treat, Maynard, and thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about our company.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody.